So there are a lot of risks, and I talked a little bit about some of the previous risks, right? Like the pricing and affordability will become a very significant gap in the industry. We've seen this, and you spoke about fortified homes, especially in the southern U.S. We've seen this in California, along the West Coast, Florida, up into New Jersey, New York, where the perils are so severe that there are insurers that are pulling out of those markets. So what that means is there's no longer the ability to even purchase insurance. There isn't enough capacity in the market because insurers are moving away to saying that this is no longer a financially viable region for me to insure in, and so they just don't offer insurance. And what that risk means is that individuals need to self-insure their home, which it's not a viable solution. And again, I already said, this is the biggest investment someone will likely make in their lifetime. The majority of Canadians cannot afford to self-insure their home. And so that is, I would say, the biggest risk is that we see markets that then need to pull back from the market. I don't believe we're in that level of crisis yet, and I feel confident in the work that's happening in the Canadian insurance industry to make adjustments to create change. I think we've learned from the other markets in the U.S. and internationally that we need to do something different, and we need to stop that from happening. I really liked your visual earlier of the triangle. If the insurance and financial system collapses, then the home that collapses, and that's the other risk, is that if our system is not in place and will not insure, and we pull out, that's the equivalent of it collapsing. And the downstream impact is, again, it's not just that people can't afford homes, it's people can't buy homes, people won't buy homes. It is a very significant economic risk within Canada as well. The other piece is stronger regulation could come into place, and stronger regulation can be a positive thing, and it can, again, can be very negative in making insurers pull out of regions, out of offering certain coverages. So again, heavy interference with regulation. We are regulated by OSFI, obviously, but increased regulation will again really put pressure on the system. So the biggest risk I see, and just reiterating, is that it causes the industry to have to pull away from areas where we need to provide security and provide support for Canadians. And again, that then has downstream impacts economically, and especially on the people in this room as you're building homes and there isn't insurance available for those individuals. That's the risk. And again, a risk we're seeing happen internationally right now.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Stephanie, too. So this next question, I think we're going to put to all three of you. This is Andy not paying attention when we all met together and planned this out, so my apologies. So the question to the three of you is, with resilience, do you see this currently where you are as being something that is a cost center, something that is a box that has to be checked and it's going to add cost? Or is it, are you looking at it as potentially a risk mitigation? So if some of these things are done, can it actually reduce risk, which could affect things like warranty costs or affordability homes? And the last one, or do you see it as a market advantage, or do you see potential for all? Who wants to go first?
I can go first on this one.
Sounds good.
So I come from a unique situation in the industry right now because I work for a cooperative insurer, and our purpose is financial security for Canadians in our communities. And so I don't see this, and our organizational leadership does not see this as a cost center or a checkbox. We see it, and I'm going to kind of flip that it's not a requirement. It is fundamentally our purpose and why we exist. So not cost center, and that can have a bit of a negative connotation, but it is something that we need to advance and need to do. I do see it as risk mitigation and adaptation strategy. We have a significant inventory that we're managing of existing homes, And there is work that we're doing within our organization to fortify those homes. So we implemented Build Back Better strategies in 2024, right before the big four. We implemented a Build Back Better strategy for resilient roofing, sump pumps in basement. That's how we settle claims. And it takes you move from an indemnity model to a risk mitigation model. So these kind of tactics are risk mitigation, as we have to adapt Canada's existing homeowners inventory. And the last thing is, it's a strategic competitive advantage to be at the forefront of this work. I shared that slide on, consumer expectations. We are in a crisis right now, and we know that. And to the earlier points made, we will eventually move beyond this crisis. So it's about creating the infrastructure and creating the offerings around what that client of the future is going to need, and to really exceed the expectations of that clientele. So I truly believe that it is a market competitive advantage to be, very, very well planted and active in the resiliency space.
Michelle, I'm sensing your industry and you folks at Cooperators are ready to collaborate with builders to figure this out.
100%. Our leadership works with ICLR, with home builders across Canada, to help advancing these conversations.
So just a little note, Michelle, I was just thinking about this. You folks have this Build Back Better. That's for existing homes, right? Existing homes.
Correct.
And you announced, I think, a couple of years ago, one of your colleagues said that you actually have a certain amount of dollars that if you build back a home that has been destroyed or what have you, that you actually will pay for extra things like H-clips, hurricane resistance, and everything else. And you gave a dollar figure that was available for that to be done. Just so you know, as an old framer, she gave the dollar figure, and I actually did the math in my head for H-clips on a truss, 12 pitch truss on a typical single detached home. The money that they were providing could pay for it 4 to 5 times over. That's how serious these is for these folks. So maybe something like that for new home builders. Anyways, Phil.
I think to your question, Andy, the old model that we operated pushed all of this into a cost center kind of perspective. I think the old model of building your builder budget, pricing everything out, and then seeing if you can pay for it with the revenue from the homeowner purchase just fundamentally is broken in terms of trying to reinvent ourselves in this space. I think, Steph, you made a good point that there's so much knowledge gap and so much different perspective across the entire industry that to just simply tell builders you need to put X, Y, Z in, and builders put it into their budget, and then they go, well, I can't afford it because nobody's going to buy it, and then it stops. Basically, they're saying, well, I understand it's a problem, but I can't fix that problem, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But what ends up happening is, well, that problem doesn't go away, and eventually, as builders, they're going to make it our problem. And to your point, Stephanie, that's when codes come in or other policy or regulations come in, and that's when the resistance happens. And so I want to just acknowledge the fact that we're sitting on this stage with a builder, government, and an insurer, which I don't know in the last 5 or 10 years how many times that's happened, because truthfully, it's been so siloed over the years. We've always worked in our own little bubbles, and we've all just kind of made it work, whether it was because the market was strong or whether because we could find creative ways, but we're now at this pressure point where it simply just doesn't work in the siloed approach. And so we've sat with the ICLR over the years, we've sat with different groups, including your LEAP group, trying, to your point, be more on that forefront to help the conversation, because just putting it on the sticker price on a new home doesn't work. It hasn't worked for a little while. We've kind of told ourselves it worked for a little while, but to move forward, genuinely to move forward, we need to rethink the whole ecosystem around the fact that resilient homes and a resilient infrastructure. So I'm even talking about beyond the home, all of the infrastructure in our communities that we're talking about with the LDCs, with the conservation authorities. All of those conversations have happened over the years in their own little pockets, but bringing them all together and understanding how we can create the value that carries through the whole equation is where hopefully we start getting a bit more traction on some of these things. To your point, Andy, understanding that there's an opportunity to pay for all of this with the H-clip example you just gave. That's knowledge I bet you 90% of the industry isn't aware of. And we had conversations in the Alberta market around the Build Better Back program that you guys have. And, can we adopt that into something of an upgrade package? Right now, if we informed homeowners, there's an opportunity through insurance that you could upgrade to a more resilient cladding system. you're going to get a better insurance rate, you're going to get preferential opportunity there. And it's interesting to them, but once again, like, they don't know how to do the math. And so they look to us, they look to the industry to go, well, is this the right decision? And so when you bring in the government, when you bring in the insurers, when you bring in the builders, all united in terms of the narrative, the conversation, and basically getting back to the fact that there are fundamental things we can do, we just don't know how to do them yet as a group. Well, that's on us to figure out. And so I think the old model won't work in the new world. And so we have to kind of figure out, how do we carry the value from start to finish?
That's awesome. That's a lot to unpack, Phil. That was excellent. Stephanie?
Right. So I think all three, in a way, on the resilience, you had said about the cost center, the risk mitigation, or market advantage. But I'll start with the risk mitigation. So when I did the deep dive on environment, social, and governance reporting during my master's, I looked at why the top 10 U.S. builders that are publicly traded were providing information on their carbon emissions, why they were providing information on climate risk. And basically, it was the investors that were demanding this information. And so from a risk management perspective, regardless of the political environment that we find ourselves in on some of this type of sustainability reporting, if you want to call it that, nonetheless, and Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but nonetheless, it seems that the investment field is still very much concerned about climate risk based on where they invest their dollars, right? And so from a builder perspective or land developer perspective, if you're being asked by your investors, what is your climate risk, which can include how durable are your buildings, that's something that you'd want to be very much aware of. It can be a market advantage because it sets you apart from other sort of run-of-the-mill type of companies that are just kind of squeaking over the building code line. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that it costs money. And some of the builders in the case study project said to me, some of them are like, well, I've had a couple of customers that were interested, but a lot of them were saying, my customers can just barely get in the door as it is. And so doing anything extra is just really, really challenging to them. So it's a trying to find that balance or that sweet spot where we can hit the targets that we need to hit, create the resilience that we need to create, while also doing it in a way that's affordable. And so that's where there's still a lot of, not just knowledge gaps, but there's still a lot of research as well, like behind the scenes. That, that early part of that graph that I showed you, yeah, there's more work that needs to be done in that space.
Well, thank you, all of you. We're going to do a little round robin, this last question. Do you remember what it was? Okay, good. So the last question is, let me just see if I can read this right. Give us a sense of a practical shift for the industry, for all of us. Just a practical shift that we could make in the next 24 months, so 2 years. Something that would be impactful, that would make a difference from your perspective. Michelle, it looks like you want to.
I can go.
Yeah.
I actually have two. One is find out what clients want tomorrow. And the reality is what we're experiencing today is going to bias their view. There's economic struggles across Canada. And so, research into understanding where client behavior, client demographic, how that's going to change over the next 5-10 years is critical to building out strategy and to be frank, to selling strategy to investors, to different parts of your organization. So that would be number one. Number two is this is really a challenging problem to solve. And so when we started, we did I would say, do something small as a pilot and understand that client behavior, how it's absorbed. When we started Resilient Roofing, so when we started our Build Back Better, and one of them is that it's Resilient Roofing and hurricane straps, we said we identified the size and scope of a climate event, and we were gonna go in and just work outside of our policy wordings and see what happened, and see how it was, how people, how they felt about how we came and how they responded. And so We had a single wind event in Atlantic Canada that was the right size for us to just do something that was completely outside of the scope of our organization, outside of our standard practice. And that gave us a ton of insight into how was it received, what were the barriers and challenges. And to be frank, even though you wouldn't think it, putting on a resilient roof on a home, there are barriers and challenges in an insurance cycle. And we were able to address those. So find something that you can do and find a small way to try it, to understand, to overcome those barriers in a more controlled and quick way. And as a resilient roof is I would say from our industry perspective, it's an easy one. It's the single largest protection of a Canadian home. It's wind, wildfire, hail resilient for if you put on resilient roofing. So it's a very impactful change. But there are challenges in that journey that it's good to try it and see what that response looks like.
Thank you. Next. Phil?
I think from my perspective, it comes back to the fundamental education that we need to instill across the industry and across just the larger ecosystem. You can't ask your builder teams to try and be more resilient if they fundamentally don't understand the problem at hand. Sure, they can cost something. Sure, they can try to negotiate a better contract. But if we don't understand the true root cause or the true root data, you kind of miss the mark no matter how hard you try. And I think that's education on our side of the equation. But then I do hope that through all the great work that like Stephanie and the government and cooperators is doing, we can bridge the gap to the general population of Canada. I think, to your point, when you buy a home, it's a moment in time. Maybe it happens once every 5 or 10 or 15 years. And quite honestly, you probably aren't thinking resiliency at the start of that journey. Maybe it comes up halfway through or at some point, and we need to make sure that when that moment of time comes to educate them, that the right information's there, that they can understand the information, and that there's solutions to provide them coming out of that education. Because ultimately what's gonna end up happening is it's gonna be a whirlwind of conversation, it's gonna be a whirlwind of decisions. They're gonna just figure out how to buy this home, and then we're gonna miss the opportunity. And so I think as an industry, that moment in time is something that we can do better over the next 12 to 24 months. And I think it starts with, the group that's on the floor here.
That's nice. Phil, I think you've reminded all of us of something we've all known to be true, and that is we're going to need to get back to the why, that our teams, our industry needs to understand why this is important, what it is that's happening. It reminds me a little bit of the whole energy efficiency thing we've gone through over the last 20, 25 years, right? I remember as a builder, we had great ideas about how we were going to design that air barrier around the new house. Boy, in our architect department and our supers are going to design it, and it was going to be perfect, and we were going to do it this way and that. And the moment we took it out to the site, to the people that handle it, it changed. But here's what we learned is, when our framers, the people that actually do the work, the builders actually do their work, once they understood why the air barrier is important, they were the ones to come up with the very best details that cost us less money. That's the benefit of the why. That's the solutions. Stephanie.
So I have two, but I'll dovetail onto what Phil was just saying about the knowledge. That would be a critical one. Now's the time. Educate yourself to learn about what the hazards are in your region, what are some of the solutions around them, so very much like what Phil was saying. But one thing that, although the downturn is very painful, like what you mentioned, some of the builders that have been part of the case study have indicated to me that they're using this time to upskill their trades, because when you're super busy, the trades aren't interested in changing or doing anything different because they're just trying to get the houses out the door. So in a downtime, it's a perfect time to upskill yourself, your staff, and your trades, and to make good use of this time so that you're ready to roll when things make a turn.
Don't waste a good crisis.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
And then the second one is, like I mentioned in that graph, is to, in some way, shape, or form, have your voice heard as it relates to the codes and standards development process, so that cost and constructability, which are the two things that I focus on specifically to try to insert into those processes. From a builder perspective, cost and constructability is accounted for, because in the current process, the way it is, those aren't necessarily considered. And you would know that, Andy, from your involvement.
That's right. Yeah, Phil?
Maybe just to add on, for all the builders in the room, take a look at your staff right now and ask yourself, is there someone you could go to that knows resiliency in your organization? And if the answer is no, try and find that person. Give them the runway to actually carve out time in their scope to dive into this. It might be a week, it might be a month, it might be a year-long investigation that ends up happening, but give someone in your organization the runway to actually spend some time into this, and don't just make it like another thing on the side of their desk. Like, genuinely give someone in the organization runway to really get into this, to then be able to educate the whole organization.
That's wonderful. That's excellent. Phil, that was, Michelle, Stephanie, that was excellent. We do have a little bit of time left for some questions. Joanne, are we good for some questions? Yep. Okay, so I'm going to pass this over.
The podium? Yeah. So we'll do some Q&A and open it up to the audience to see whether you have any questions for any of our panelists or any comments too. There's got to be a couple of questions in here. Yep. We're going to run a mic.
Hi, I'm a property manager, so we get a lot of these houses and keys after they're built, and then we get brought in after decisions have been made, and we can't give our input. I think what Michelle was saying about the upgrades and the resilience stuff is the sooner you get the people at the end involved, the better your decisions can be made all along the way. So I think something like, how do you feel about the insurance companies getting involved with the builders at the design phase? Because we have a lot of owners who buy the house and then start shopping for insurance. They haven't talked about anything, and they're asking the question, well, do I have PECs? Like, what is my electrical like? All these questions. Do you see a world where the insurance gets shopped for at design, and you can work with the buyer to mitigate their cost, or to build in resilience and see the value when they're designing the house, not after they've got keys and it's done and they can't make any changes until 30 years later?
So I love where your head is at. It's very true. Insurance is often the last thing people think about they're thinking about their mortgage, they're doing the work, they do pre-approvals for mortgage, all of that's done at the front end. And then they get the sticker shock of, oh my goodness, I have to insure this home and this is the cost. And I would say that's unfortunately the vast majority of insurance transactions happen as an afterthought as they're getting ready to close. So we've started some of that work, and ICLR has been bringing builders and insurers and government together, and this is a great example of a less siloed approach and working more collaboratively to solve this problem, because we are 100% aligned that we should have all stakeholders at the table. Similarly, when I'm designing an insurance product, builders should know what we're designing and kind of how that could help in the sale. So we're thinking about pricing structures. What does that look like? There's opportunity, and we're starting to work together to understand how can we leverage our combined information, skills, knowledge, and work more collaboratively to solve these problems earlier on in the journey versus, again, where we're at right now, which is a bit of a reactive state. So yeah, I would say the industry is incredibly excited about moving into more of that collaborative space earlier on in the process.
Nice, very good question, really nice answer. Just real quick, ICLR, it's a bit of a mouthful, Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. There you go. Ron Isaac, many of us know Ron. Ron's here, so there you go, have a conversation with them. Any other questions? Again, we do have some time.
I have a question, Andy.
Yes. Brandon.
This one also to Michelle. So we're designers, builders, we're also operator customers. Have you thought of thank you. Have you thought of partnering with those in the renovation space to provide incentives to us that are ripping buildings apart and rebuilding them, or making recommendations to our clients about resilient roof, for example, where we can say to this client, hey, you're insured with ABC company, but if you shift over to cooperators, they'll put $3,000 towards your roof and amortize it over your policy period or what have you. So that's a curiosity. Yeah,
so I'd say at a high level, we've done some research into into where in I would say the life journey of a client, so at the sale of a property or at the at renovation, or to be frank, the worst one is at claim. Like what is the best advice? How can we best leverage those interactions? And so because of the I'll say the emotional nature of the claims transaction, that's where we've started, because we know it's the most impactful emotionally in a negative way. Home sales are generally, a new home sale is generally a positive experience. And usually when someone's choosing a renovation, it's positive. And so we're trying to tackle that one first. And working again with some of our claims vendors, so people in that restoration renovation space, to understand, how can we better apply resilient measures? What kind of resilient measures? There are, you spoke earlier, there are specific perils that are impactful in certain geographies, and we need our vendors and our renovation contractors to be supporting us and saying, this home could really stand to have a sump pump with a battery backup. Like, this would be really impactful for you for flood, or a resilient roof would be really critical. So that's work we're doing, and again, more so I would say on the claim space, because that's the part of the journey we've tackled first. But we will be tackling other parts of our journey, the sales journey, the renovation journey, to say how can we use our partners in the industry to be able to amplify the message of the importance of resilience features, the importance of making your home more adaptable to climate events. So it's a really great call out and a really great point.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, Stephanie?
I'll just let you know that the work that we're doing, the Sustainable Resilient Homes program that we've put together with the tool as well as the workshop, and even with the case studies, we work with both new homes and retrofit in that space. So, if there's an opportunity to get into a place, upskill through the capacity building and then workshops to get broader knowledge, then that can dovetail nicely with your efforts as well. So there are some resources that are being developed for the industry, both new and retrofit.
We can take another question. That's a good question, Brendan. Yes. Oh, sorry.
I guess for me, it's a question and a comment. I mean, from a builder perspective, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that when we are bringing a client in and we're in the financial stage and we're exploring green mortgages for high efficiency homes, we should also be talking about insurance at that point, and insurance companies that are offering incentives, much like green home programs, to simplify the process and get it out of the way early on. But I guess the second part would be, and I look to Sonia, because I have a feeling you're already working on it, is aligning with Fortify out of the U.S. to bring in the program, to bring in the third-party certification and the volunteer builders to trial it, because much like net zero, it's the next path forward. Is that a fair statement? And I'm sure building knowledge is already on that too.
Yes, and I'll put in a plug as well for certification and things like fortified homes. Is insurance pricing works on a lot of key factors similar to your cost structures, but two of the big items are data quality and scale. And something like a home certification allows us to address the data quality. We see this all the time, and I'm sure this might shock you, but we'll ask things like, when was your home built? Or how large is your home? Or how is your home heated? And the answer is generally, I don't know. And so for us to ask the question of, is your home resilient? The answer is going to be, I don't know. So something like this really helps in both making it seamless for clients, as well as giving the data quality, and again, then building scale in the industry to help with, again, incentives like pricing that will come as long as we kind of build in that space.
Thanks, Jen. Folks, we're going to wrap it up. Oh, can we take an extra minute? Joanne, you good? Yes,
Thanks.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, obviously we're talking about, mass market and trying to curb the curve and bring general rates down. But with respect to, the smaller portion of, mostly people in this room that are building resilient, high-performance homes, I'm curious what, the lenders and insurers are doing internally to educate, their appraisers or adjusters to, when they're looking at a home that might be more resilient or have low operational costs, it seems as though, pain point for us builders is that it's not on their checklist, right? So we're not realizing those better rates for those unique high performance homes. So the homeowner isn't really getting the benefit And thus, obviously, down the food chain here, where is that market advantage for us to build those high-performance homes if the rates aren't being provided? So I'm just, again, curious, where is kind of that internal training for the appraisers and the adjusters to recognize what we're doing and give us the better rates?
That is a great question. And I'm going to kind of rewind back to what I said about some of the learning we had on our pilot in the Atlantic. And our claims adjusters weren't ready. And they didn't have the right scripting around why resilient roofs were important, why it was critical, that it wasn't a scam. We weren't coming in and going to charge them more money now that they had a resilient roof. To be honest, the opposite was true. We were going to actually discount because of a resilient roof. So there was a lot of change. Sometimes when you assume a good change, you learn very quickly that your support staff don't have the tools to have those conversations. So we've done some work this year in looking at ways we can provide that information more readily, more quickly, more efficiently, because every organization has a huge claims organization and a huge inspector organization generally, and I'm going to generalize for cooperators, we're across the country. So any change management education strategy that we've implemented, we're starting to get traction, but we know we need to do more automation. So as a long-term vision, we're looking at ways to say, if I have a client in a home in the GTA, how can they say, here are your top 4 perils, here are the top 4 risks that are in your home or your building, and the second part is, what are your mitigation strategies and what can you do? So we are looking at ways that we can build tools similar to what government is talking about on giving that information quickly to individuals in an efficient way, and looking at it both from the adjuster, the inspector, and actually in the sales functions as well, to say this information should be readily available and it should be easy to grab, because we know with the complexity of what our teams are dealing with, we need to give them that information quickly. So we're continuing on our education path as far as we can go, and then building in tools that can basically give them that information immediately.